It began as a missing pattern. In Lagos Ascendant, the vertical city spiraled upward from the Atlantic haze, its towers laced together by transit webs and glass-sheathed walkways. Life moved along its arteries in overcrowded trams and delivery drones. People complained about the heat, the traffic, the price of backup bandwidth. No one complained about their immune systems. The first to notice was a clinic nurse who did not live to tell anyone. She felt a wave of dizziness during a double shift, chalked it up to exhaustion, and reached for a diagnostic wand. By the time the wand finished its routine sweep, she was on the floor, heartbeat stuttering. Her coworkers scrambled, their own wands beeping red in confusion. The machine displayed contradictions, catastrophic immune collapse, but no pathogen detected. Her cells looked as if a silent bomb had gone off, as if decades of wear had been folded into a single hour. In another tower at nearly the same moment, a boy on a rooftop court stopped to catch his breath and never resumed his game. Across a shipping platform, a customs inspector slumped over a terminal, heart and lymphatic system unraveling with a microscopic grace that betrayed deliberate intent. The emergency department of Lagos Ascendant's largest hospital overflowed before dusk. Its director, halfway through dictating a memo about budget overruns, stared at the input queue and saw the same pattern repeating. Sudden immune collapse, multiple organ systems failing, no common exposure. It was only a pattern because of the number of cases arriving at once. But in those few hours, no one yet saw the number. People saw chaos, not design. It took another day for someone in orbit to recognize the design. Dr. Amina Kowri had built a career on the study of how pathogens failed. She was not content when a virus merely killed. She wanted to know what had gone wrong in its plan, what evolutionary shortcuts it had taken, what vulnerabilities it had left exposed. She believed, with the stubborn calm of a lifelong skeptic, that there was always something crude at the heart of a disease. Some sloppiness, some compromise forced by physics. In the isolation lab aboard Hephaestus Ring, she stared at the first clear electron micrographs of what was killing the people in Lagos Ascendant, and her conviction faltered. The structure was not simple. It was not a single virus, nor a colony of bacteria, nor any recognizable parasite. It was a nested architecture of protein shells surrounding a lattice of folded chains and self-assembling segments that, under stimulation, rewrote their own configuration. It did not simply bind to receptors, it tested them, as if interrogating the cell about its history and lineage. "Look at this," murmured Professor Henrik Langenberg from her left. His hair stuck up in uncombed tufts. He had been pulled from sleep barely an hour before and had forgotten his glasses, but he barely seemed to notice. Even squinting, he saw the same thing. He highlighted a section on the display. "These patterns repeat across samples from 3 continents, and they are mathematically exact. This is not drift, this is code." Amina said nothing. She watched a simulation of the structure interacting with a healthy immune cell. The thing sampled surface proteins, then altered its configuration, then sampled again. Each change was purposeful, not random. It was not attaching at the first opportunity. It was searching for something. Henrik glanced at her. "It is targeting us." "Targeting what?" she asked quietly. "Our particular mess," he said. "Our variation. Our genetic noise. Look at how it rejects anything that looks like older hominid markers. It is tuned to the mixture that is modern humanity." On the other side of the glass, the containment chamber hummed with air recyclers and sterilization lamps. Inside, a tiny bead of fluid on a slide represented a city's worth of fear. The transmission from Earthside was terse. Multiple outbreak sites now. Lagos Ascendant, a coastal arcology in East Asia, an agricultural hub in South America. The common symptom profile had been classified and pushed to every clinic. No cure, no understanding. When the Hephaestus Ring system flagged this as a probable engineered bioweapon, the alert went off in Admiral Leon Markovich's private quarters aboard the ISS Resolute Horizon. The admiral did not look like the caricature of a war leader. He was of medium height, graying at the temples with a softness around the eyes that came from sleepless nights more than indulgence. His uniform was unadorned beyond the necessary insignia. He preferred to listen first, then speak with the weight of synthesis rather than volume. He read the briefing in silence, lips tightening only once, when the model projected fatalities if the pathogen remained unchecked. The unknown pathogen, concluded the report, exhibits complex adaptive behavior and likely non-natural origin. Origin point unclear. Probable vector, high-altitude microscopic dispersal. Evidence suggests intent to target human immunological features. It did not yet say what everyone in the command ring was thinking. Someone out there had decided that humanity should not continue. Leon's orders to the fleet were simple. Raise readiness to full battle alert. Increase orbital surveillance, especially for anomalies entering the atmosphere. Prepare for the possibility that the first shot of the war had already been fired, and it had not been a kinetic impact but a microscopic whisper. On Earth, citizens saw different messages. Global health alert. Novel pathogen identified. Stay indoors if symptomatic. In the feeds that were not yet censored or overwhelmed, some saw fragments of what Amina and Henrik had seen. A few caught references to unnatural patterns, to design. Among them was a teenaged girl in Lagos Ascendant whose world had just folded in on itself. Niabaka watched her older sister struggle to breathe on a makeshift mattress in their cramped living space. The hospital had turned them away with apologies and exhausted gestures. There were too many others to treat, and no one knew how to treat them. Nia had always been a scavenger of information, trawling public datasets and academic pre-release servers. She ran a small channel popular among students and curious outliers, where she explained complicated scientific findings in plain language. Until 3 days ago, her most popular video had been a breakdown of how orbital rings balanced stress loads. Now she pointed a camera at her own face, eyes red and voice steady. "They do not know what this is yet," she told her audience. "But they know it is precise. It is not like any virus or bacteria we have seen. It is something that looks at you and decides whether you are human enough to kill." She paused, glancing at her sister, then forced herself to continue. "I will keep tracking whatever data I can get. There are smart people up there," she said, nodding toward the ceiling and the sky beyond, "who will not let this stand. But you must help by not trusting rumors more than you trust evidence." Her anger, even then, was not a blind fury at some abstract enemy. It was rage at unfairness, at asymmetry. Someone had broken the unspoken rules of struggle. You fought with ships and lasers, with blockades and sanctions, not by whispering death into people's blood and pretending it was an accident. As the days passed, patterns sharpened. So did intent. The first transmission from the Kharid Dominion arrived as a hymn. Every screen, every public surface, every unsecured feed flickered. For a heartbeat, the planet's communications networks displayed static, then resolved into an image of shifting shapes bathed in luminous color. The figures were not human. They were segmented and jointed, with too many limbs and translucent plates overlaying denser internal structures. Their forms were crowned by needle-like antennae that pulsed in synchronous waves. When they spoke, their voices had been synthesized into human tongues, as if they had rehearsed this moment. Dwellers of the aberrant world intoned the central figure. "We are the Kharid Dominion. We are the keepers of balance. We are the custodians of purity. Your line is a chaos vector, a threat to the harmony of sapient life. We have taken action." The figure extended a limb. Behind it, an intricate holographic pattern of the Abyssal Bloom unfolded, nested shells, adaptive curves, recursive loops. "This is the bloom of the abyss," the being said. "A merciful purge. It will unmake your species in silence. Your passing will be brief. Your contamination of the cosmic order will end. Do not struggle. There is no cure. There is no negotiation. There is only correction." On Hephaestus Ring, in a secure observation theater, Amina watched the transmission between pulses of heart monitor alarms. Around her, others watched as well. Henrik, summoned by a Kurd alert Marisol Ademi, connected via an encrypted channel from Helix Frontier Biotech's headquarters. Oleg Safarov, present as the Solace Union's envoy, a handful of military and health officials. They watched not just the words, but the patterns beneath them. Henrik froze the hologram a fraction of a second before it faded. "There," he murmured, stepping forward to overlay the Bloom rendering with his own earlier models. "They are proud of it. They are showing off their work." Marisol, appearing as a sharp-featured woman in a tailored suit, eyes ringed by exhaustion and resolve, leaned closer to her own display. "They just gave the world a marketing reel," she said. Amina turned to her, not yet following. "If we can crack it," Marisol went on, "this is every grant application in history rolled into one. An engineered adaptive system that can walk through a body, decide what belongs and what does not, and act with precision. That is beyond any tool we have ever built. If it were not currently murdering us, I would call it beautiful." She did not say it lightly. To her, biology was machinery with quirks, and wonder she had built an empire on that belief. Helix Frontier Biotech had cured diseases once thought incurable, had edited genes and repaired tissues and flooded markets with therapies that extended productive life far beyond previous norms. To see an alien civilization wielding biology in this way was at once terrifying and intoxicating. "They are not wrong about some things," Henrik said quietly, as the others glanced at him in confusion. "We are a chaos vector. We change systems. We refuse to stay within boundaries. That does not justify extermination, but it tells us how they see us. as noise that must be dampened, as a bug to be patched. Lurking behind all their thoughts was a question: could the patch be turned against its makers? Admiral Leon Markovich's answer, when asked indirectly that evening by the Solace Union's Executive Council, was simple. "If this is war," he said, "then they opened with something they believed we could not understand, let alone answer. They misjudged us. Our best retaliatory strike is not only to survive, but to learn, adapt, and turn their weapon into our strength. Every second we spend trying to undo what they did is a second they gain. We must take it from them. We must own it." He did not speak of revenge. He spoke of necessity. Any war fought with planets at stake could not be won by half measures. In the following days, the work on Hephaestus Ring took on a new urgency. Amina and Henrik dug into the architecture of the Abyssal Bloom with the focus of people who know that the clock is not measured in days but in corpses. They discovered something that astonished even them. The Bloom did not act the same way in every host. It was not a simple automated killer. In some individuals, for reasons that were not initially clear, it paused. Its adaptive loops spiraled, testing and retesting, and then stopped. The immune system remained battered but intact. The individual fell ill but did not die. Henrik saw the pattern first. He correlated host genetic markers, microbiome profiles, even the presence of certain viral remnants from ancient infections. In a subset of people, the Bloom found variables it had not been optimized to handle. It hesitated. It tried to learn. In that hesitation, there was an opening. "Anything that learns can be taught," he told Amina, echoing his earlier words. "If we can redirect its adaptive behavior, not just block it, we can make it serve us. Or at least stop it from serving them." Marisol, looping through models at Helix Frontier, proposed a bolder interpretation. "We grow it," she said, in a private session with Amina, Henrik, and Leon. "We put it in a cage and make it run laps until it learns the tricks we want. We build bioreactors in secure facilities, feed it controlled samples, push it into evolutionary corners it cannot see right now. We do not destroy the gun. We disassemble it and rebuild the trigger." Amina, who had spent her life destroying pathogens, felt a chill. "You are suggesting we domesticate the Abyssal Bloom." "I am suggesting we do not have time for modesty," Marisol replied. "The alternative is to keep trying to build fire breaks in the dark while they send more of these gifts. We are outnumbered and outgunned. This is the only advantage we can seize. Their arrogance in revealing their hand." Leon weighed the proposal. To him, every decision was measured against the survival of a species. "Containment," he said. "Multiple layers, fail-safes that cannot be hacked by an alien choir, parallel lines of research, focused on neutralization in case domestication fails. And if at any point we decide this is too dangerous, we burn it, regardless of potential profit." Marisol nodded once. She had expected nothing less. "Agreed. We will call the Domestication Initiative BloomThera. Internally, for now. Out there, it will not matter what name we use unless it works." The first experiments took place deep within Hephaestus Ring, in a module that had once been dedicated to manufacturing tissue scaffolds for organ regrowth. Now the vats contained a carefully neutered strain of the Bloom, starved of certain components, supplied with others, coaxed to adopt a more cooperative stance. It was like trying to convince a wild animal to become a guide dog without ever letting it off its leash. The Abyssal Bloom responded to constraints in ways that fascinated Amina and horrified her in equal measure. Denied the ability to fully collapse an immune system, it instead began to adjust its interactions, reinforcing certain pathways and dampening others. It seemed almost eager to demonstrate its capacity for control, as if its original programming valued adaptability above all else. "We can use that," Henrik said. "We can steer it with feedback, give it increasingly complex tasks that lead toward repair instead of destruction." When the first human trial was proposed, the ethics board balked. So did Amina's own conscience. Yet in Lagos Ascendant and a dozen other cities, the death tolls mounted. Families were being cut in half, in thirds, in pieces, by an invisible design that cared nothing for consent. Volunteers came forward anyway. The initial cohort included frontline medical workers, emergency responders, and people like Sergeant Talia Ko, whose squad had been decimated by Bloom exposure during a chaotic crowd control operation. Talia had watched 3 of her closest friends fold over in mid-sentence, their bodies failing with a quiet completeness that left no time for last words. When asked why she volunteered for the trial, she answered without bravado. "My body is already on their list," she said. "If I go down, I want it to mean something." The trial took place in a sealed wing. Amina oversaw the procedures personally, fingers hovering inches above each volunteer's arm as the BloomThera infusion entered their veins. The therapy was a cocktail. Fragments of the domesticated Bloom, nanoscaffolded immune primers, and a suite of monitoring agents to track every microsecond of interaction. For some, the reaction was swift and overwhelming. Fever spiked, organs roiled, and the monitors blared. For others, the change was subtler. Existing Bloom activity seemed to quiet, then reorient itself, its destructive loops diverted into stable circuits. Talia lay on a biobed, staring at the ceiling as the therapy coursed through her. She expected fire. What she felt instead was pressure. A deep ache in her bones, as if they were being reinventoried. Memories flickered. A childhood illness, a long-forgotten vaccination, scars from training accidents. It was as if something was walking through her history, taking notes. In the observation room, Amina watched Talia's immune markers. They dipped, then rose. They rose higher than baseline. Cells that had been on the brink of initiating self-destruct pathways stabilized. Inflammatory storms calmed. "It is learning," Henrik whispered. "It is learning that killing the host is not the only path to fulfilling its directives." By dawn, half the volunteers were past the danger point. Several emerged with immune profiles that looked almost upgraded. They were not invulnerable, but the Bloom strangelets within them now acted as sentinels, intercepting incoming natural infections before they could take hold. Marisol received the encrypted report and sat back in her chair, eyes closing for a brief, silent moment. Behind her, the Helix Frontier Biotech logo glowed on a wall. Shares in her company had plummeted when the outbreak began, as investors fled anything associated with health. She knew now that if she survived this, if anyone survived, Helix would become something more than a corporation. It would become part of the architecture of human survival. The question was how transparent they were willing to be. The answer was decided for them when Ghost Orchard pried open a crack in Helix's data vaults. Jinsu Park had not set out to become a saboteur. Ghost Orchard, the distributed collective he helped coordinate, had been born as a loose network of data activists and open science enthusiasts. They believed that information, especially about health, should not be hidden behind paywalls or proprietary silos. When they saw the Abyssal Bloom carving through cities while companies like Helix went ominously quiet, they assumed the worst. From a cramped workspace in a retrofitted warehouse, Jinsu and his scattered colleagues used repurposed satellite bandwidth and exploited negligence in corporate security protocols to slip inside Helix Frontier's research index. They did not find a conspiracy of silence. They found BloomThera. It was not yet ready for prime time. That much was clear even to them. But they also saw the survival curves of the first volunteers, the marked difference in outcomes. Jinsu argued briefly for restraint. So did some others. But the images of mass graves, of makeshift cremation pits and overflow morgues weighed heavily. So did messages like the one from Nia Bako, whose sister had died 2 days into the outbreak. She had sent Ghost Orchard raw footage of wards overflowing, of lines of people waiting outside closed clinic doors, of bodies wrapped in sheets on sidewalks. Her accompanying text was brief. "If you are sitting on anything that might help," she wrote, "and you are waiting for permission, you are complicit." Ghost Orchard released the data. The leak was not clean. It included charts, incomplete protocols, fragments of code names. But it was enough. Independent experts and amateur analysts around the world pounced on the information, dissecting it in live streams and forums. Nia devoted a series of frantic videos to explaining what BloomThera was supposed to do, what it had already done, and how dangerous it could be. "This is the alien plague," she told her viewers at one point, eyes burning with a mixture of fury and awe. "They sent it to erase us. We are bottling it. We are calling it medicine. If we get this wrong, we die faster. If we get it right," she hesitated, choosing words carefully. "If we get it right, we become harder to kill than they ever imagined." Public pressure became a tidal force. Triage centers overflowed with demands for access to BloomThera. Solace Union officials faced protests and pleas. Some accused them of hoarding a cure for the rich. Others demanded immediate, universal distribution. Leon Markovic saw the protests from orbit as blips in infographics and live feeds. He felt the weight of each face behind the data points. He convened an emergency session with Amina, Marisol, and Oleg. "We are out of time to keep this in the lab," he said. "If we do not authorize broader use, people will start brewing their own versions based on half-understood files. That will be catastrophic." Marisol grimaced. "I designed BloomThera to be dangerously incomplete without key manufacturing steps. But you are right. Desperation will push people to cut corners. Controlled distribution is the lesser risk. Amina, who had spent the past day watching patients live and die based on access to experimental doses, spoke softly but with conviction. "We must release it," she said, "with strict monitoring, with full disclosure of risks, but we cannot keep it from those who would otherwise watch their families die." And so BloomThera moved from secured bioreactors into wider channels. The authorization was framed as an emergency measure, not a commercial launch. But the pragmatics of distribution required infrastructure, and Helix Frontier had spent years building it. Drones lifted from manufacturing platforms, carrying carefully shielded vials to cities under siege. Clinics received pallets of precious liquid and hastily trained staff to administer it. News feeds around the world lit up with variations on the same headline. "Aliens sent a plague to wipe us out, we bottled it and sold it as medicine." The hyperbole glossed over the reality. BloomThera was being distributed at cost and often below, under agreements brokered by the Solace Union. But the line captured something deeper. It framed humanity's response not as a desperate gamble but as an act of swaggering defiance. In orbit, in the cold cathedral of the Shroud of Purity, Archseer Vekar Onun watched the human news with mounting disbelief. The Shroud was the pride of the Kharid Dominion, a vessel grown and built around a core of living biostructures that pulsed in sympathy with the Dominion's central doctrinal networks. Its walls were lined with chanting priests and bioengineers who believed themselves to be the hands of cosmic correction. Vekar had expected to watch human cities fall silent, then depopulate. He had expected to see networks crumble, transmissions fade. Instead, he saw hospitals crowded but still operating, fleets mobilizing, voices raised in angry, coherent protest rather than quiet despair. He summoned a specialist from the Vexel Bioforges, a hunched figure who bowed deeply as it entered the command chamber. "They are feeding the bloom to themselves," Vekar said, mandibles flexing in disdain. "Explain." The Vexel specialist displayed streams of intercepted human data. It translated key findings into the carried biosymbolic language. The Bloom's adaptive core was being constrained, coerced, retrained. This was not anticipated, the specialist admitted. "We optimized the Abyssal Bloom for their immune architecture, but we did not consider the possibility that they would regard it as a resource." "Resource," Vekar repeated. The word tasted like poison. "They treat sanctified correction as a commodity." He turned his gaze back to the human news. In one clip, a nurse in Lagos Ascendant injected a child with BloomThera, hands trembling, tears on her face. In another, an exhausted doctor explained to a crowd that the therapy was not a miracle, but it was a fighting chance. Vekar saw not humility but arrogance. To him, they were not grateful beggars receiving mercy. They were thieves, stealing holy fire and using it to light their own forges. "Escalate," he said quietly. "If the Bloom cannot correct them, we will." The next Kharid blow was not a message. It was a fleet. The Shroud of Purity detached from its staging orbit and bent its course toward the blue-white sphere that had defied death. Smaller vessels joined it, sleek predators grown in the vats of the Dominion shipyards. They bore configurations that warped light and space, their bioarmor humming with stored energy. The first Kharid strikes targeted infrastructure, orbital farms, communications relays, and, most critically, Hephaestus Ring. Admiral Leon Markovich had anticipated this escalation. He had not anticipated its exact scale, but he knew that any enemy willing to seed a planet with a custom-engineered extinction tool would not hesitate to follow up. "Fleet status?" he asked calmly on the Resolute Horizons bridge as alarms flared and vector maps populated with incoming signatures. "Combat readiness achieved," replied his operations officer. "We have 3 capital ships, 8 escorts, and 2 carrier platforms in position. Reinforcements en route from the far side of the orbit." It was not enough to match the carried in tonnage or raw firepower. But Leon knew that wars were not won solely on those terms. They were won with understanding, with asymmetry, with nerve. He opened a channel to Captain Rahul Ibarra, whose lean, long-range frigate hung near Hephaestus Ring, tied to the station by an invisible cord of responsibility. "Captain," he said, "you are priority for defense. If they take the ring, they take BloomThera and our central research. You are authorized to use all necessary measures to keep them away from that station." Rahul, sitting in his cramped command chair, nodded once. His face was angular, eyes dark with intensity but bright with an engineer's curiosity. Before the war, he had been planning to retire and teach orbital mechanics. Now he found himself calculating fire arcs instead of trajectories for cargo barges. "We have a few surprises," Rahul said. "Let us see how they like improvised gravity fluxes. Groundside, Sergeant Talia Sio stood in a fortified clinic in Lagos Ascendant with her newly rampart-augmented squad, listening as the skies filled with thunder. Rampart serum had been a derivative of BloomThera, concentrated and repurposed for those who needed their bodies to function in the worst conditions imaginable. It temporarily pushed the immune system into a heightened state, pre-activating cells, thickening protective barriers, accelerating repair processes. It came with risks: autoimmune storms, fatigue, long-term unknowns. Talia had taken it without hesitation. Her squad had followed her example. They felt its effects as a relentless energy, a subtle hum under their skin, as if a second life had been overlaid upon the first. Now they waited, not for the bloom but for the possibility of a ground incursion. If the Kharid decided to deploy boarding pods or insertion teams, cities like Lagos Ascendant would become battlefields not just of medicine but of kinetic force. The first fleet engagement was a dance of light and prediction. The Kharid ships moved with eerie coordination, their trajectories adjusting to one another as if guided by a single will. Human sensors detected bioelectric signaling between them, a form of fleet-wide nervous system. Their weapons were a mix of coherent energy beams and droplet masses of molten matter accelerated to terrifying velocities. Human vessels responded with railguns, missiles, and a web of drones that attempted to disrupt the Kharid coherence with bursts of electromagnetic interference. Rahul's frigate executed maneuvers that looked suicidal on first glance. He skimmed the edge of an incoming beam's path, survived only because he had anticipated the Kharid's target prioritization algorithms. He fed their predictive systems false patterns, making empty decoys look like high-value assets. On the resolute horizon, Leon watched battle telemetry overlay the starfield. He felt a cold clarity settle over him, the peculiar calm that came when one too many variables fell away, and all that remained was the now. For all their technological superiority, the Kharid had not fought humans before. They did not expect reckless charges that flouted their projected threat envelopes. They did not expect Ghost Orchard to slice into their comm patterns in the midst of battle, injecting noise calibrated to resemble corrupted doctrinal updates. Jinsu, hunched over his console far below the actual fight, directed a symphony of jamming pulses. He had been given unprecedented access to fleet systems, his usual wariness toward military cooperation overridden by the enormity of the stakes. "Think of it as misquoting their scriptures mid-sermon," he muttered to a colleague. "If they listen to their data like Revelation, we will make Revelation confusing." The first Kharid wave failed to break through to Hephaestus Ring. Several human ships were heavily damaged. One escort was lost, its crew's names etched into the databanks even as the fight continued. But the station remained intact. In the relative quiet that followed, the Solace Union, Helix Frontier, and the adaptive research teams gathered to consider their next move. BloomThera was no longer merely a desperate therapy. It had become a platform for something more. The idea for Project Turnabout emerged from a convergence of realizations. Henrik, analyzing the Bloom's code and the Kharid transmissions, recognized structural homologies between the Abyssal Bloom and Kharid internal bionetworks. The same principles that guided the Bloom's interaction with human cells seemed to guide how Kharid implants interfaced with their hosts. Reluver and Sesh, once a senior engineer in the Vexel bioforges, confirmed this when they arrived at Hephaestus Ring under Thari protection. Reluveran's defection had been an act of quiet rebellion months in the making. Watching the Abyssal Bloom's planetary effect through Kharid channels, they had felt the first cracks in their faith. The Dominion's narrative of merciful correction did not match the images of entire communities dying in agony. They had approached the Theri Concord in secret, offering knowledge in exchange for asylum. Ambassador Lumeresh Tal, a diplomat who believed in leverage as much as mercy, had brokered their passage to Hephaestus Ring. Now Reluveran stood in a human lab, their limbs folded in a posture of balanced humility and resolve, and explained to Amina, Henrik, and Marisol how the Kharid themselves were wired. "Our bodies," they said, through an interpreter lattice that rendered their complex clicks and tones into measured human speech, "are threaded with implants that bind us to the Dominion's doctrinal core. They regulate the hormones that mediate loyalty, the sensory filters that shape perception. We are never fully apart from the bionet." Amina shivered. "You are puppeted." Reluveran inclined their head. "We are harmonized. That is the ideal. Or was, until the harmonization became justification for annihilation." Henrik tapped the table. "The Abyssal Bloom uses the same languages. It speaks to your implants and to your body, as it speaks to our cells. That means the code we are writing to domesticate it could, in theory, be adapted to infiltrate your Dominion's internal systems." Marisol's mind leaped ahead. "We do not use the Bloom to kill them," she said. "We use it to constrain them. A moral weapon, Not a genocide in reverse, but a lock on their ability to commit genocide again. Ambassador Lemarish, listening, felt a mix of admiration and dread. To the Theri, humans were rapidly shedding the skin of naive newcomers and revealing something far more dangerous. A species willing to rewrite the operating systems of their enemies without firing a shot. You propose, Lemarish said slowly, to insert into the Kharid bayonet Kaya constraints that will prevent them from deploying anything like the Abyssal Bloom again, and to force their decision systems to recognize sapient life as protected, not aberrant, Amina added. We cannot trust a truce that relies only on their promises. We must make it part of their biology to hesitate before choosing extermination. Reluveran closed their eyes, internal tissue shifting behind semi-transparent plates. Such a modification would reach deep. It would not simply change policies. It would change what it feels like to be Kharid. Henrik met their gaze. It is that, or they continue to erase species that do not fit their doctrines, including us. Project Turnabout began in earnest the next day. Ghost Orchard supplied the distributed computational muscle. BloomThera's global deployment provided a continuous stream of adaptive feedback, as millions of human bodies hosted domesticated bloom strains that learned, shifted, and reported their behaviors through embedded monitoring agents. The result was a planet-sized training ground for biocode. The challenge was to design a payload that would slip past the Dominion's defenses. It had to look like what the Kharid expected, a doctrinal patch to correct a perceived impurity in the Abyssal Bloom's performance. To them, human survival was a symptom of corruption, a deviation from the script. They would be eager to fix it. Reluveran suggested using the Shroud of Purity as the injection point. The Shroud is not just a warship, they explained. It is a node of doctrine. It receives the earliest and most orthodox updates. If we can make it believe that an update is needed, and that the source is the central temple on Shekar Prime, it will pull the payload through. Rahul volunteered his ship for the operation without being directly asked. If we are going to dance that close to their capital world, he said to Leon, you will need someone who knows how to make a frigate look like a whisper, not a shout. Leon considered the risk profile. The plan required a human strike group to engage near Shekar Prime, to fix the Shroud's attention and force it to request a doctrinal update. At the same time, Ghost Orchard would piggyback the Turnabout code onto the data stream. Your odds of returning are not high, Leon said bluntly. Rahul smiled a tired, crooked smile. My odds of meaningfully contributing to history are very high. I will take that trade. Talia, hearing of the mission, requested assignment to the boarding teams tasked with infiltrating the Shroud and planting a physical BloomThera module in its core. If I have to go inside their holy ship to make this work, she told her commanding officer, I want to be the one to kick their altar. Her application was approved. New Marrakesh, far from the center of Kharid attention, became the test bed for the Turnabout code. The colony's citizens had already been heavily dosed with BloomThera, making their systems ideal for experimenting with controlled exposure to Kharid tissue analogs. In a sealed facility, samples of Kharid-like bionetworks, grown from genetic templates supplied by Reluveran and refined with Theri assistance, were exposed to prototype Turnabout payloads. Researchers watched as the payloads threaded through synthetic receptors, rewriting responses. In one run, a simulated order to purge non-Kharid cells was reinterpreted as an instruction to isolate and observe, not eliminate. In another, a command to amplify aggression cascaded instead into a muted curiosity response. We are not giving them our ethics, Henrik said during a late-night review. We are giving them something more basic, a reflex to stop and think in the presence of other minds. The details will be theirs to fill in. At last, the models converged. The payload was ready. The operation began under the cover of what appeared to be a straightforward military escalation. Human fleets, bolstered by newly repaired ships and Theri intelligence on Kharid deployment patterns, jumped into contested space near Shekar Prime. The Resolute Horizon led the charge, its hull patched and upgraded, its crew seasoned by previous engagements. The Kharid responded in force. The Shroud of Purity took its place at the center of a defensive formation, its bioarmor pulsing with doctrinal authority. It viewed the human approach as both blasphemy and opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the Dominion's unshaken dominance. On the Shroud's bridge, Archseer Vekar watched the tactical displays bloom with hostile contacts. His internal implants hummed with updated strategic directives. No part of him yet suspected that the data stream carrying those updates would soon carry something else. Rahul's frigate slipped through the periphery of the engagement, its profile minimized by clever manipulations of sensor echoes. It rode the wake of a larger destroyer, then peeled away, aiming not at the enemy ships but at the tight, humming web of the Shroud's biocore field. Talia and her boarding team waited in the frigate's cramped staging bay, armored and wired. Rampart serum burned in their veins, heightening reflexes and dulling fear. The plan was simple and brutal. Pierce the Shroud's hull at a weak point provided by Reluverin, fight through internal defenses to the core access point, and plug in a BloomThera module disguised as a safety override. Remember, their mission handler's voice crackled in their helmets. You are not there to kill anyone you do not have to. Your target is the system, not the crew. The system is more dangerous than any individual. They nodded, each privately aware that in the chaos of close-quarters combat, noble intentions often died first. But they carried the instruction as a lodestone. The frigate's breaching clamps fired. The transition from the vacuum of space to the humid interior of the Shroud was a shock. Kharid corridors pulsed with organic light, walls flexing subtly as fluids flowed through hidden channels. Talia's boots stuck momentarily to a living membrane as she stepped through the breach. Kharid defenders rushed to meet them, chittering in outrage, extra limbs flashing with bladed extensions. The first exchange of fire was vicious and brief. Rampart augmented Talia's reflexes enough that she saw a blade coming and deflected it with the barrel of her rifle before it could pierce her armor. In her mind, she saw not monsters but people whose faith had been weaponized. They pushed forward, guided by Reluverin's schematics. Twice they hit dead ends where the Shroud's internal architecture had shifted since the maps were made. Twice they jury-rigged new routes, blasting through thinner sections of living bulkhead. Meanwhile, in the datasphere, Ghost Orchard orchestrated their part. From hidden nodes across human space, they synchronized pulses of code that rode along Kharid doctrinal traffic. They had spent weeks studying how the Dominion's network handled updates, how it authenticated messages, how it reconciled conflicts. Their Turnabout payload was wrapped in layers of mimicry, imitating not just the structure of previous patches but the subtle timing signatures favored by the central temple on Shekar Prime. Think of it as forging a royal seal, Jinsu told his team as they prepared to activate the attack. Every stroke has to feel right. The critical moment came when Talia's team reached the Shroud's core. The chamber was a cathedral of flesh and light. At its center, a vast, translucent organ pulsed in time with the ship's systems. Tendrils extended from it into the walls, carrying both nutrients and information. In Kharid doctrine, this core was sanctified as a physical embodiment of the Dominion's will. Under fire from frantic defenders, Talia dashed across a narrow bridge, cradling a compact BloomThera module against her chest. Bullets and energy pulses scorched the air around her. She saw in the corner of her eye a squad mate spin and fall, armor cracking. Rampart would keep that soldier alive longer, but not forever. She reached the core. Up close, the organ's surface was warm and slick. It throbbed gently. Talia felt, through the faint feedback of her suit sensors, the rhythm of distant commands and updates. She slammed the module into a prepared notch in the bridge, twisted it, and heard a satisfying click as microinjectors sank into living tissue. In that instant, the Shroud systems registered a critical anomaly. Alarms lit up in Vikar's internal display. A foreign device had interfaced with the sacred core. Protocols designed to prevent corruption initiated a cascade. Request doctrinal verification, the system whispered in his mind, using the language of faith. Vikar, more angry than afraid, authorized the verification procedure. The Shroud's core reached out across the bionet toward Shekar Prime, seeking confirmation, seeking fresh instructions to correct the intrusion. Ghost Orchard was waiting. Their forged doctrinal packet, the Turnabout payload, rode the verification request back along the same channels. To the network, it looked like a message from the Central Temple. An urgent correction to deal with an unforeseen impurity in the Bloom and in the humans' unexpected resistance. The Shroud accepted the update without question. In the core chamber, the BloomThera module activated fully, its domesticated strains of the Abyssal Bloom unfurling in microscopic bursts. They were carriers, not of death but of new decision rules. They whispered to the carried implants, to the central core, to any system that would listen. Before you execute an extermination command, pause. Before you categorize a sapient pattern as aberrant, flag it as protected. Before you sanction annihilation, route the decision to a new, inaccessible loop. These were not moral arguments. They were switches, inserted deep into the guts of the Kharid decision tree. The effect rippled outward. On the bridge of the Shroud, Vikar felt a momentary blankness as his internal implants rebooted. His vision fractured, then reassembled. Target indicators, which had been locked on human ships and ground installations, flickered. "Fire!" he ordered, intending to unleash a barrage on a cluster of fleeing transports. His command traveled down his nervous system into the ship's control interfaces. There, at the junction where we'll met execution, the Turnabout modifications intercepted it. The system queried the target category. Sapient life forms, protected. The command stalled, split, and diverted into a loop. The weapons did not fire. Across the Dominion, similar microcrises unfolded. Carried soldiers raised weapons against fleeing civilians on a contested world, only to find their augmented limbs refusing the motion. Fleet officers issued extermination orders that dissolved into harmless diagnostic routines. On Shekar Prime, in the shadow of the central temple, core biostructures shuddered as the Turnabout payload propagated. Technicians scrambled to trace the source of the anomaly, but by the time they realized that something fundamental had shifted, it was too late. The constraints were embedded, woven into the same roots that sustained their holy networks. Amina and Henrik watched the propagation from Hephaestus Ring through layers of encrypted monitoring. They had seeded silent sensors throughout the BloomThera network, piggybacked on Turnabout's signal to get a sense of its reach. "It is taking," Henrik said softly, eyes wide. "They are hesitating. They are questioning." Amina did not feel triumph. She felt a deep, trembling responsibility. They had just altered the way an entire civilization's nervous system operated. It was impossible to predict all the consequences. On the resolute horizon, Admiral Leon Markovich received fragmented reports from across the front. Kharid vessels were disengaging or firing only on non-sapient targets. Some were going completely dark, their crews overwhelmed by inexplicable system behavior. He saw an opening. He transmitted a message directly to the Shroud of Purity, overriding standard hailing protocols. To his surprise, he received a response. Archseer Vekar's image appeared on Leon's main display, a towering armored figure, antennae trembling with contained rage. "You have corrupted us," Vekar said without preamble. "You have polluted the core." Leon looked at him, not with gloating, but with the steady gaze of someone who understood that this was the fulcrum upon which countless lives rested. "You sent a plague to exterminate us," Leon replied. "We studied it. We tamed part of it. We used it to protect ourselves. And now we have used it to prevent you from doing the same to others. You called it correction. Consider this counter-correction. You have no right," Vekar spat. "You forfeited the right to unilateral correction when you targeted an entire species for elimination," Leon said. "We will not apologize for stopping you. We are offering you a choice. Accept these constraints and coexist, or tear out your own nerves trying to remove them and risk your civilization collapsing." Vekar's internal implants pulsed, feeding him conflicting data. His training told him that aberrant civilizations must be purged. His biology now refused to align fully with that doctrine. He felt, for the first time in his life, a gap between belief and action that could not be bridged by will alone. In hidden chambers on Shekar Prime, Kharid technocrats debated furiously. Some advocated for a radical severing of the Dominion's bionet, even if it meant plunging their society into chaos. Others, more pragmatic or more fearful, argued that survival was more important than doctrinal purity. Reluveran, watching from Hephaestus Ring, understood the turmoil. They had felt their own split long before, the moment when the Dominion's rhetoric had begun to sound like an excuse for atrocity rather than a path to harmony. Ambassador Lumeresh observed both sides with a diplomat's eye. The humans had done something that no other known species had dared. They had made direct edits to an enemy's capacity for violence. It was both genius and hubris. Oleg Safarov prepared the next move. "The ceasefire proposal must be clear and hard," he told Leon and the others. "We will not beg. We will not threaten annihilation. We will present them with reality." The message that went out from the Solace Union to the Kharid Dominion was concise. "You have deployed a bioweapon of extinction. We have neutralized it and turned part of it into an adaptive medical platform that now sustains billions. We have used its architecture to embed constraints within your own biotechnological infrastructure. You will not be able to deploy such a weapon again without destroying yourselves. We are willing to share a limited, audited version of our therapy technology with you to stabilize your systems and treat your casualties, on the condition that you formally renounce biological extermination warfare and accept oversight from an interspecies council, including the Theri. Refuse, and you will endure a slow unspooling as Turnabout tightens its hold and your own systems cannibalize your ability to command." On the Shroud of Purity, Vekar reviewed the conditions. He wanted to reject them, to hurl himself and his ship into one last glorious charge and die proving his devotion. But he was not alone in his body anymore. Turnabout had made sure of that, and somewhere within him an older, quieter part recognized that the Dominion as he had known it was already gone. The question was whether something else would survive in its place. In an unprecedented move, the Kharid Dominion convened an emergency council that included not only archseers but also Vexel engineers and Rancan file officers whose implants had been most affected by Turnabout. Their discussions were not broadcast. Even the Theri could only infer their content from shifts in encrypted traffic. The decision, when it came, was simple and profound. The Kharid Dominion transmitted a ceasefire acceptance to the Solace Union and the Theri Concord. It was couched in language that preserved as much dignity as possible. They portrayed their agreement as a strategic pause, an adjustment to unforeseen variables. Behind the rhetoric, the reality was plain. They would stop. They would not unleash anything like the Abyssal Bloom again. They would, grudgingly, accept assistance in stabilizing their bionet, even if that assistance came from the very species they had tried to erase. The war, in its hottest form, ended there. The aftermath did not bring instant peace, nor did it resolve the ethical mazes humanity had just carved, but it allowed time. Time for mistrust and fear to seep into the soil and, perhaps, grow into something more complex than hatred. On Hephaestus Ring, in a newly established joint clinic, Dr. Amina Cowrie stood in a transparent observation alcove, watching as a Kharid patient, flanked by wary escorts, received a carefully adjusted BloomThera infusion. The Kharid's body reacted with a flurry of internal activity. Their implants hummed, their bionet resonating as if tasting the alien therapy. Monitors displayed cascades of data. For a long moment, nothing obvious happened. Then markers associated with Turnabout-induced instability began to settle. Feedback loops that had risked spiraling into paralysis smoothed out. The patient's breathing eased. Amina exhaled slowly. She thought of the nurse in Lagos Ascendant who had been the first to fall, of Nia's sister, of the countless others whose names she did not know. She could not bring them back. All she could do was ensure that the technology their deaths had forced humanity to develop would be used with more care than the tool that had killed them. "This is dangerous," she said aloud, more to herself than to anyone in particular. "We are knitting ourselves into their biology, and them into ours. There will be no going back." Marisol Ademi, standing beside her with arms crossed, nodded. "We passed no going back when we put the bloom in a bottle," she said. "Now we have to decide who we are with that power." In another part of the station, Nia Bacco stood before a small camera again. Her channel had grown beyond anything she had imagined. People now looked to her not just for explanations, but for narratives that made sense of the new world. "So," she said, voice clear, "where are we now?" She outlined the story as best she could. How an alien plague had become a medicine, how those medicines had become leverage, how humanity had learned to turn not just weapons into tools, but doctrines into code and back again. "It is easy to say that we won," she said. "We survived. They did not erase us. Our cities still stand. Our ships still fly. We forced our enemy to stop." She paused. "But we also did something no species should do lightly. We reached into someone else's sense of self and changed the wiring. We did it to stop genocide. I believe it was necessary. I also believe that this means we will have to hold ourselves to a standard we have never been held to before. Because if we can do this to them, what stops us from doing it to anyone else? To ourselves?" Her gaze was steady, challenging her viewers as much as comforting them. "Maybe what stops us is remembering how it felt to be on the other end of a weapon we could not see. To remember that the moment we stop questioning ourselves, we become the people who sent the bloom in the first place." In orbit above Hephaestus Ring, on the bridge of the ISS Resolute Horizon, Admiral Leon Markovic stood alone at a wide viewport, watching traffic patterns. Human ships came and went, cargo haulers laden with medical supplies, patrol vessels on routine runs, research craft carrying samples. Carried ships were present as well now, held to strict routes and under heavy scrutiny, but present. Theri vessels drifted nearby, their elegant curves catching the station's lights. The war was over in the obvious sense. Yet Leon knew that something larger had only just begun. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not just as another spacefaring civilization, but as a species that would not die quietly, that would seize the tools meant to destroy it and refashion them without apology. He thought of the Kharid's first message, labeling humanity a chaos vector, a threat to their precious order. They had not been wrong. He allowed himself a small, private smile. "Aliens sent a plague to wipe us out," he murmured to the empty air. "We bottled it. We sold it as medicine. And we are not done yet." The stars outside did not answer. They burned with indifferent light, waiting to see what the noisy newcomers would do next.